Good morning, welcome to Breakfast with Louise Minchin and Dan Walker.
Our headlines for you today. 4 hours to break the deadlock. Leaders in Greater Manchester are given until midday to agree a deal which will take the region into the highest level of COVID restrictions.
Late last night we got, I guess, what you could only call an ultimatum, a fairly provocative ultimatum delivered via the media. So it's difficult, but I am determined to try and respond positively.
Yes, Manchester's Mayor says he'll meet other local leaders this morning to discuss putting a deal to the government, but time is running out, and if there is no agreement by midday, the people of this city, this region, face having restrictions imposed.
Prince William shows support for businesses forced to close in Liverpool with a surprise video call to cafe and bar owners.
Good morning. Thousands of museums are all warmed up, ready for October half term, but wondering who can and will turn up. A warning this morning that £45 billion is being lost this year from the attractions economy.
We're live at Salisbury Cathedral, finding out how this 800-year-old church is being restored and renovated during the pandemic, and we'll take you on a very special tour above the cathedral's rooftops.
Good morning. It's going to be a mild day ahead today, following on from a mild start, but there is rain in the forecast, there's some showers, there's also some sunshine and gusty winds. I'll have the lot in 10 minutes.
It is Tuesday, the 20th of October. Our top story, local leaders in Greater Manchester have until midday to agree a deal with the government on moving into the highest level of coronavirus restrictions.
Last night, following 10 days of talks, the community's Secretary Robert Jenrick set an ultimatum that restrictions could be imposed on the region if a consensus is not reached in the next 4 hours.
In the last half an hour, Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham told BBC Breakfast he's committed to negotiating a fair financial package of support for residents and businesses.
Late last night we got, I guess, what you could only call an ultimatum, a fairly provocative ultimatum delivered via the media. So it's difficult, but I am determined to try and respond positively and constructively. I think it's just important, Dan, if I can just remind your viewers what this is about, in fact, who this is about. This is about people who work in pubs, people who work in bookies, people who drive taxis. These are the people that Westminster politicians traditionally just ignore, but we are not going to do that because these are the people who will face certain harm if a Tier 3 lockdown proceeds.
Well, in a moment, we'll speak to our political correspondent, Chris Mason, who's in Westminster. But first, let's go to our correspondent, Dan Johnson, who's in Manchester. And Dan, you know, the clock is ticking on this, isn't it? Not long to go. Morning.
No, and it's been ticking for quite some time now. For 10 days, these discussions have been going on. We've kept saying that the negotiations are continuing, that they're perhaps getting closer to a deal, that they're carrying on talking. But yesterday, that completely broke down and the discussions ended with no agreement. There was a blistering statement given just at the end of yesterday by the local leaders here in Manchester, questioning the government's approach, questioning the sorts of facts and figures, the statistics that were being given in support of these measures, saying that perhaps the government's its figures about the intensive care capacity in Manchester filling up were not quite accurate, that perhaps capacity wasn't any higher than it would normally be at this time of year. So a lot of bad feeling, and then late last night that ultimatum from the community's secretary, which has only angered Andy Burnham, the region's mayor, even more. So it's hard to underestimate the bitterness now that exists between the politicians who are discussing this and people really just wanting to know exactly what's happening. They were already calling out for clarity about what the rules were going to be, but the local leaders have questioned whether the Tier 3 restrictions the government is seeking to now impose, potentially, were even going to be effective in bringing down the virus. They'd wanted to see more evidence of that. They'd wanted to see more support for workers that would be affected by restrictions. So now we see what the local leaders here in Manchester can agree between themselves in a meeting this morning, and whether they're able to put that back to the government and come to any sort of deal before this midday deadline.
Dan, thank you.
Let's discuss that with our political correspondent, Chris Mason, who's in Westminster. Chris, so they've been at this for 10 days. They've got 4 hours left. And as Dan was talking to us there live from Manchester, are they going to be able to find that common ground?
It looks a tall order, Dan, because to be honest, by the end of yesterday, they couldn't even agree on what they talked about around the table. So there's been a real breakdown of trust. They're lobbing statistics at one another with increasing irritability. Here's what we do know will happen this morning. In an hour's time at 9 o'clock, Greater Manchester's leaders will get together. At that meeting, they are going to agree amongst themselves on a figure that they would accept from government for additional support for workers who aren't able to work when Tier 3 restrictions are imposed. They will then put that figure to the government and see if it is accepted. Now, Andy Burnham won't say publicly this morning what that figure would be, but there's a real demand from Greater Manchester that there's an acknowledgement that the region has been living under pretty tight restrictions for months already, unlike much of the rest of England, and that should be acknowledged in the financial support that is offered. And the argument that Mr Burnham is making, Dan, is that this isn't a row that just matters to people in Greater Manchester. His argument is, as we head through the autumn into the winter, vast swathes of England are likely to find themselves under the Tier 3 restrictions, and therefore what he is able to negotiate for his city region might have repercussions for plenty of the rest of us as the winter progresses. So yeah, 4 hours to go, still no agreement that there will be a further meeting between the two sides this morning. Nothing yet scheduled. The government says its door, though, is always open.
OK, we will keep a very close eye on it for the rest of the morning. Thank you, Chris.
See the headlines as they happen and watch BBC News live in the app and get the full story with bbc.co.uk/news. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.